Hi, everyone, and welcome again to the Greatness Movement podcast. I'm your host, Kenny Weiss. I'm a life coach, speaker, author, and founder of the Greatness Movement based here in Phoenix, Arizona, where we guide you to become the greatest version of yourself. Well, as always, if you think this show is something that can help you or other people, please share it, whether it's on Facebook or YouTube or Spotify, iTunes, whatever format you're listening to. A couple quick announcements just to go through, and we'll get to why we're attracted. What attracts us to certain people in relationships, even business. The same thing applies. So, for those of you that haven't heard, I'll be a TEDx speaker January 23rd here in Chandler, Arizona. I think the tickets go on sale this week. So, if you follow me on Facebook, if you don't, whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook or any of the platforms, send me a friend request. Tickets go on sale if you want to see what I'm going to talk about in person. As soon as I get the information, I'll post it. So you can find me on LinkedIn or Facebook under Kenny Weiss. Also, for those of you that are looking for deep personal growth, you're looking for solutions. I have the private group, the Greatness Community. That's the name of it, Greatness Movement Community. That's what you want to search for on Facebook. Send an invite. And if you're looking for solutions to turn your life around, I'm always posting special things in there just for group members, tips and tricks to make your life better. So if you're a solution-oriented person, go ahead and send an invite and join the private Facebook group that we have going, trying to build, a group of people that, hungry to be the greatest version of themselves and take that message to others. So let's get into why we're attracted to certain people. Now, whenever I talk about this over coffee with somebody, their jaw kind of drops to the floor. This can be an uncomfortable topic for a lot of people because it's really how denial works and things we haven't learned about and may not want to see or admit just yet. It's part of the journey that we all have to go on. But to put it plain and simple, here's how attraction works. Literally, you come across somebody and your brain and body goes, oh my God, this person is absolutely perfect. They're going to remind me and help me relive the exact trauma I went through in childhood. Whoopee! Like literally, that's what's happening. That whole, like I see it all over the place, social media or dating sites. I want that butterfly feeling. Well, that butterfly feeling is caused by that trauma reaction. Okay. You see, when we go through trauma as kids, it creates a chemical mix that our brain and body becomes addicted to. And so we seek to relive it unless we, if you read my book and go to my courses or do the work, you can learn to shift that and change it. But since most people choose not to do the work, all anyone's ever doing is reliving their trauma against themselves in everything, every choice we ever make, career, friends, hobbies, all of it, especially relationships. So the reason you're attracted to somebody is because you want to replay what you went through with mom and dad, or maybe your grandparents raised you, or what foster parents, whatever it was, the chaos you lived in. Because there's an actual mirroring component in our brain that looks for it. Here's an example. You ever walk into like a networking meeting or business meeting or some sort of public meeting where there's no assigned seating, and you find yourself, if you've never paid attention, pay attention to the next time you go to something like that and watch. You're going to feel this uneasiness, and you're going to notice your brain and your eyes darting back and forth. You're going to be looking, scanning the room, unsure of where to go, who to sit next to, what seat to take. And eventually, your brain and body will settle on sitting next to somebody. Like I get fascinated at networking meetings or whatever, watching where people sit. Well, as you get to know people, you'll see they have identical traumas. Like the reason they're sitting next to each other is because there's a comfort level. Their brain and body, they've experienced similar chaos in their lives. And so that's why they feel comfortable sitting next to this person, whereas that person over there, it's like, no, I don't want to sit next to them. There's just something icky about that person, or something's off. Well, that's because your brains and bodies have been through different trauma. They don't align. So you feel repelled by them. Okay. So that's all attraction is. That's why, I mean, think of all the times you've gone to a concert or gone to something and you end up in this deep conversation with some stranger. I talked about this in the trust video months back of how trust works. It's all based on trauma too. We'll trust people that remind us of the pain and trauma we've been through, even if they're untrustworthy. But it's familiar, it's known. See, this is how our brain works, and this is why you're going to seek out somebody. Like, for those of you in a terrible relationship, your partner is not the problem. I mean, I'm not condoning their poor behavior, but you chose it. You looked for it. I could have put you in a room with 10,000 men or women who wouldn't do any of the stuff you're going through in your marriage, and you'd be like, nah, they're boring. Great looking, nice person, but they're boring. It's literally what would happen. Because it's how our amygdala works. That's our fear center. Remember I said when you walk in a room and you're bouncing around, you're looking, that's your amygdala. It's on high alert. It's looking for safety. Now, our amygdala doesn't know right from wrong. It only knows known versus unknown. Okay, so here's the problem with our amygdala. If you've been through traumatic childhood, which we all have, I've talked about that countless times. Everyone's been traumatized in childhood. Most people like, no, not me. Well, again, 2 questions. When you were a kid and never felt sad, scared, or angry at anything your parents did or said in that moment, could you discuss it with them? I haven't had a single person say they could. They just get yelled at. They couldn't express themselves. And 2, do you keep any kind of secret from your parents? Anything you've done in your past, any thought or belief? Well, that right there is trauma, because if you showed them who you really were, they'd reject you. And that's why you have a secret from them. That's trauma. Okay? You were raised in an environment where it was not okay to pursue your authenticity, your genuine pursuit of yourself, because we need attachment to survive. All right? So that's, again, I have to keep, for those of you who listen all the time, you've heard this 1,000 times, but they're new listeners. They're not aware of this process. So I have to keep going back to educate the new listeners, because they haven't heard any of this stuff. So they don't know. They're like, I haven't been through trauma. Well, I have to always kind of dip back into this and re-educate. Okay, so back to our amygdala. The way it works is it's looking for known versus unknown, because our brain, literally all it's ever trying to do is conserve energy. It doesn't want to work. It wants to repeat what it knows so it can sleep, because it takes tremendous energy to run our brain. That's why our brain will categorize experiences. So even, let's say you went through you're one of those that recognizes, look, my childhood was massively abusive. All right, just very traumatizing. Well, your brain knows that. See, when trauma happens, it creates an emotional chemical addiction within our brain and body. And because our brain seeks to repeat what it knows, it doesn't know right from wrong. It knows, I went through this traumatic experience. It's a known. And it must be okay because I'm still alive, right? Again, it doesn't know right from wrong. It knows known versus unknown. And if your brain is still alive, that means it thinks, well, this is okay. I've survived it. So you wonder why you have an abusive spouse, or a spouse who neglects you or ignores you or whatever. It's just like your childhood. That's why putting you in a room of strangers, you're going to gravitate towards somebody that your brain goes, oh my God, I know this person. I've lived this. That's how our amygdala works. Think of our amygdala as something that's 200 feet out in front of us, and it's pre-reading every situation to keep us safe. It all happens subconsciously. We're not even aware of it. It's a pre-screening that happens, and that will draw us toward and away from other people. Remember I said other people, you're like, oh, I don't want to sit next to them. That's because your brain and body has no emotional experience your amygdala is going, I don't know that. I'm not familiar with that type of person. And so it creates a big fear reaction, says, bad, stay away. We don't know what will happen. That's an unknown. We want to go towards what is known so we can go to sleep and not have to do work, and we can repeat and fire the exact same patterns that we've always produced over and over and over. It loves that. Okay? So that's why you're constantly picking. You wonder, you change jobs, you have the same type of boss you had last time. You keep ending up with the same type of boyfriend or girlfriend or husband. Or in the case like me, in my first marriage, I picked my father. In my second marriage, I picked my mother. Now, they had subtleties of my brothers, sisters, other emotional childhood trauma mixed in. You know, it wasn't just strictly all mom, all dad. I mean, both, there's a mixture there. But I was drawn to them and ended up committing to them because there were so many similar traumatic experiences that I was going to live out with this person. And that's why we picked them. So the first thing I want you to recognize is the butterfly feeling that everybody's searching for is actually a chemical addiction in our body. It's the same, the feeling of love creates the same chemical process as snorting a line of cocaine. In other words, it's an addictive process. All right? That's not healthy, but we've never been taught anything different. So that's what we're all looking for. All right? So, like for me, one of my wives was physically and verbally abusive. And I've talked about this. My father always rejected me because, see, my dad was beat to death as a kid. My grandfather taught the whole Dale Carnegie, win friends and influence people. Yet here he is beating up my father for not finishing his dinner. So my dad went, screw this whole psychology and personal development stuff. I want nothing to do with it. Well, then here I come along, somebody who is highly in touch emotionally, has always seen the world from that perspective, loves psychology. I reminded my father of my dad, of his dad. Now, it's not that my father didn't love me, but my father was caught in his own worst day cycle, in his own trauma. And because as a society, we don't teach any of this, all he could do is his brain act out his rejection. My father never really even saw my face. All he saw was his father when he looked at me. So that's why my father rejected me, because he wasn't taught this stuff. Now, I don't blame him for that, but I hold him accountable. He chose not to learn about it. Well, that's he chose to be abusive because of that. And I will hold him accountable to that. And that's loving for all of us. If your parents have not become an expert in their childhood trauma, have not become an expert in parenting, then they've been, at the very least, very, very irresponsible parents. And the only loving thing to do is hold them accountable for making that choice. Not, I don't say blame, because you can only do what you know. And since society says don't learn about that stuff, I'm not a fan of blame, but I am a fan of accountability. We all have a choice as an adult. And if we choose not to go become an expert in this stuff, we need to suffer the consequences of that. It's like my counselor taught me, you know, when my sex life stuff started coming out in my divorce, you know, I was all angry that my ex-wife was bringing it up. And he turned to me, he goes, well, Kenny, I hear that you're really upset, but if you don't want people talking about your sex life, then you might want to make different choices. In other words, you're responsible for the choices you made, and there are consequences to them, Kenny. You can't outrun those consequences. So if you don't like the way people talk about your personal life or your mistakes, then make different choices. And that's why it's so important to go do the recovery work, because once I could learn to forgive myself for being imperfect, now that's why my whole life story is all across the internet. Yeah, I'm a train wreck, big deal. I made peace with it. And if you judge me for it, that just tells me about your own self-judgment, that you haven't worked through it. I'm not beating you up for it. I was that person too. But that's why this work is so valuable. It's because once you do the discovery work, you no longer judge other people, because you realize the second I'm condemning somebody or hating them or blaming or criticizing, oh, I'm just talking about myself. Well, once I learn to forgive myself, I don't really care what you do. It doesn't bug me anymore. So At any rate, because my father rejected me, and every time I'd open my mouth, he'd say I was looking at the world wrong, I picked a woman who did the same thing. No matter what I did, I was wrong. Even when I was right, I was wrong. I was never right. Well, that's how I felt with my dad all day, every day. I could never, ever be right. Gee, I wonder why I picked someone who was verbally abusive. I also talk about my older brother, how he used to beat me up and there's nothing I could do. He'd hold me by my head. Well, have you ever been hit by a woman? Completely frozen. Nothing you can do. Just like my older brother. I don't condone my wife being abusive, but if you've been in an abusive relationship, you chose it. You're responsible for it. And it all goes back to your childhood. And until you go back and clean that up, you will continue to relive that abuse against yourself. You cannot outrun that consequence. And I will hold there. That's why I'm not a fan of the Me Too movement. I'm part of the Me Too movement, but I think it's garbage because what I see is a bunch of people stuck in victimhood, blaming and criticizing and judging their abuser. Rightfully so, they should call out the abuse. But until they own their part in it, until they go back and look at their childhood and see how they put themselves in a position to attract that into their life, you have to own that. That's the only way you get free. And so if you're in relationships where you're with so-called bad people all the time, that's on you. You're choosing that. You're attracting that because of your childhood trauma. You must go back and address that if you want to choose somebody else. Nobody else is responsible for that. We all get to choose who we get in relationship, friendship, anything with. If you've been screwed over by people, you chose it. You always choose it. It never happens to you. I can't stand hearing that whole victim mentality. Well, there's a judgment. Okay, so let's look at that. See how I just judged? Said I can't stand that in people. All right, so now let's look at me. What is it in me that I can't stand? All right, see that you always have to flip it. If I'm judging you, if I'm making a statement about something I hate or whatever, it's always about me. So then the question becomes, what is it about me that I can't stand? Well, a lot of time, one of the things I can't stand is that I still struggle forgiving myself, that I still judge myself for my imperfections. So do you see how I just dumped all of that on everybody else? But it's not about them. It was all about me. I'm still working through the process of going, Kenny, quit being so hard on yourself. You own your stuff all day long. You tell everyone and everything, forgive yourself. Because every time I beat myself up, I place myself as the victim. And every time I place that judgment on you, I'm re-victimizing myself. See, I'm wanting to hurt myself. And I use other people by saying, I can't stand that. I'm using other people as a proxy. I'm manipulating them to then beat myself up. That's unloving to them and it's unloving to me. And the only way to work through it is just the way I did it right there. I have to own it. I have to share it. And see, what I've realized is when you do that, you get freedom because that's truth. When you confront that denial, you're in complete truth. And from truth, I can love myself. See, that's a behavior. Self-esteem comes from behavior. I just exhibited behavior that works for me. I walked in what I consider to be my authenticity, which is to own my stuff all day, every day, wake up every single day and go, where am I in denial? What do I need? What imperfection do I need to confront? And as soon as I do just like that, peace, harmony, self-love. Okay, that's how the process works. So the people we're picking is what I tell I've had new couples come into my office because they want to get a good start to their relationship. And I always tell new couples this. The single most important question you need to ask each other is, why did we pick each other? What is it in this other person that reminds me of my childhood trauma that I'm using them, and that's truth, I am using them to show me the unhealed parts of myself that I haven't dealt with. And the way we use them is you're going to start hating them, judging them, you're going to have fights, in 4 to 6 weeks of every relationship, that's when you find out if a relationship's going to work, because that's when a lot of the perfection drops and we start to get into arguments, we start to fight, and you either negotiate through those or you end. Okay, so when those fights start, the key is, in that moment, whatever you're really ticked off about your partner, it's not about them. Their behavior is showing you, just like my ex-wife. Had I known this years ago, the first time she hit me, instead of pouting and shutting down and doing all the things I did, I would have stopped and gone, wait a minute. Why do I want this? Why did I want to be hit? This is about me. Where did I learn this? Where did I learn that it's okay to be hit? Oh my God, childhood. Oh, wow. So what do I need to do? I need to learn to stand up for myself. But see, I wasn't allowed to as a kid. So I'm using this woman who's abusing me to teach me how to stand up for myself, to learn how to say no, to express my needs and wants, to stop giving myself away. Like, I adore my first wife. Look at everything she taught me. And I could do probably 10 shows on all the dysfunction I brought into that marriage, to use her to learn about how dysfunctional I am. If it weren't for both my wives, I would have never discovered the worst day cycle. See, I use them, and that's all we're ever doing in a relationship. We're using the other partner to teach us about the dysfunction we haven't faced. That's all attraction is. And so now think of that. When a fight starts, if both people go do this work and they learn the things in my book, they learn, the stuff I talk about from Pia Mellody about codependence and about how to have arguments and the confrontation model I teach, all this stuff. The second you get upset at your partner, you can actually have a discussion about your own childhood trauma. Both sides could do it. Arguments end. You create connection, true intimacy. Remember what intimacy is. Into me, I let you see. And so when I'm pissed off and angry at my partner for something they did, but I turn it around and realize, wait a minute, this is about me. And then I go to my partner and I go, look, I was really ticked off the way you did this. And I realized, no, I've set this up and here's what's going on with me. And then our partner goes, oh my God, I had no idea. Thanks for being so open and vulnerable. Well, when you do this, now we have an exchange. We're actually teaching each other and working through our childhood trauma together as a unit. That's when people hear me talk about the butterfly feeling, they're saying, oh my God, if I get the butterfly feeling, should I run? Maybe, not always. As long as you recognize that you picked your trauma partner, that's all you're ever picking is your trauma partner, ever, ever, ever. If you go in with that knowledge and your partner goes in with that knowledge, it could be a wonderful experience, because two people with massive butterfly feelings who have this information and go, look, I'm going crazy for you. That means you remind me so much of childhood. Well, I feel the same way. Okay, well, let's slow this down. Let's either hire somebody or work with a counselor, or maybe you both have become experts in this stuff already yourselves. Let's work on this together. Because we have obviously found each other so we could heal our pain. We can be great teachers for each other. Are you willing to embark on that process with me? That is a relationship. That is love. That should be your goal. So I want you to think about the next time you're in an argument with anyone in your life, I want you to turn it around and recognize you've brought this person into your life. You have all this judgment, blame, and criticism about this person because it's your unhealed trauma you're screaming at yourself to deal with. It doesn't mean they're not doing that behavior. It doesn't mean their behavior isn't improper or abusive or, not terrible. It probably is. But that doesn't even matter. You're focusing on the wrong person. They're of no significance. You pick them as a mirror to teach you about you. How beautiful are they? And that they signed up. See, this is why I adore my abusive wife so much. Look at what she did for me. She bought in to how manipulative I am. She joined me in that process and allowed me to use her as a proxy to live out my childhood trauma. All my manipulative ways and the ways I'd play a victim. And see, by not standing up for myself, by not saying no, by not asking for my needs and wants, I got to stay the victim and blame her. And she signed up for that. I'm pretty fortunate to have somebody who's willing to deal with someone like me who's using them to relive my abuse. She did the same to me. It's mutual. But I can't control her. And the only person I'm responsible is for me. I'm incredibly blessed that this woman loved me so thoroughly. Now, I've gone and done the work. I no longer choose abusive women. So I'm no longer attracted to that. But I sure am thankful that she showed up and was a teacher for me and allowed me to learn this. And it's the same for you. If you're still holding anger and resentment at any ex, if you're still complaining about them, your work is with the wrong person. They're not the problem. You are. You're using them just like I did as a proxy to play the victim. Until you go back and look at yourself and see how you set it up, you will be in jail the rest of your life. That's just a fact. So here's what you need to do if you want to change this. You have to look through your childhood. How did these people in your life mirror the helplessness, the hopelessness, the fear, the shame, the emptiness, the loneliness, the confusion, the chaos that you experienced in childhood? Go become an expert in how your childhood was so chaotic and dysfunctional. Heal that. And all of a sudden you stop seeing them as the abuser. I don't see my ex as an abuser anymore. While what she did was abusive. See, when you learn to see your part in it, that's forgiveness. People can't, I did a show on this about forgiveness. Everyone's like, oh, pray for them, let them off the hook. Forgiveness has nothing to do with the other person, ever. The person we have to forgiveness is always about forgiving ourselves because we picked this person. We allowed them into our life. Now you may say, well, I was just walking down the street and someone robbed me or raped me. Well, you still made a choice to walk down that street at that time of day, whatever it was. You're still beating yourself up for the choice you made. Until you can forgive yourself, you can't forgive them. And see, once I was able to forgive myself, that I manipulated her so horrifically, that I allowed myself to be treated so horrifically. Once I could own that, once I could accept it, I could forgive me, which means I can forgive her. That's how forgiveness works. So I'll never forget this one. I'm going to wrap it up here. When I first started seeing my counselor and, all the chaotic women I've dated in my life, I was like, Mike, how will I know when I've recovered? Like when it comes to dating and women and marriages, when will I know? And he goes, Kenny, all those women that right now, when you look at their profiles or see them walk down the street and maybe you think they're attractive, but you're like, she's boring. Well, when you start finding those boring women, not only physically attractive, but attractive in general, that's when you'll know you've done the recovery work. And I literally, without hesitation, I'm not going to say it on air, I dropped an F-bomb on him. I'm like, blank you. Because I was just like, oh my God, they're disgusting. They're ugly. They're boring. They're like, I saw these women, you think of dating sites, you're like, no, boring, yuck, yuck. That's what I pictured. I'm like, that's who I'm going to end up with? No way. Well, oh, it's so funny. It takes a long time to face your denial and face your issues. I still am highly attracted to crazy women. Man, they look fun. And because the type I picked, there was always a sexual element to them because they're massive love avoidance. So the type I would always pick, they'd always, love avoidant. For those of you who haven't watched previous shows, go back and watch. But love avoidance, especially female love avoidance, they dangle the carrot of sexuality. They have those leering looks on their profile, half naked, or even if not naked. They're set. Those profiles that are selling sex and their sexuality and sensuality. It's all a manipulation. The women that post that stuff, they're usually very asexual. It's a power grab, and they're usually very abusive. They use sex to draw you in, and I've always been attracted to that. And still, I'll see a woman like that. I'm like, man, that looks fun. That crazy sure looks fun. And then I remember my marriages. I'm like, yeah, no thanks. I'm done with that. And boring is just okay. It's just fine with me. I can handle boring. So you have basically two choices. You can do the recovery work and you'll find yourself attracted to boring people that are less chaotic, and you'll have a much quieter relationship with much less abuse and trauma, and much more peace. But to be attracted to that, you have to go create peace in yourself. And that means a ton of recovery work. Now, if you don't want to do the recovery work and you want to keep to the old model of butterfly feelings and repeating everything you've been doing and not challenge your amygdala and relearn all the emotional chemical addictions in your brain and body, then just recognize that you're picking to relive your trauma. And maybe the first step is you find somebody who does the same thing, and you can have the discussion and go, look, we just picked each other to hurt each other and show us our pain. Are you willing to be my teacher? Maybe that's the best place to start for you. I don't judge either way. I've done it all, so how could I judge you? But that's what attraction is. It's just your trauma. It's how the brain and body works. And if you want to stop attracting or being attracted to toxic people, you have to recognize you're the toxic person. And that, I know a lot of people's neck prick up. I'm not toxic. Oh, yes, you are. And if you say you're not, that shows me how toxic you are. I'm not trying to judge you. I'm trying to bring you into reality. You have to face that reality and go do the healing work. And once you do, you'll see it. Right now it's like, no, he's wrong. It's funny. I was having a text conversation, someone I haven't talked to in about a year, and someone I met a networking thing, and we had a discussion about all this, and they thought I was full of crazy. And literally, we were just finishing, and they've been through a lot in their life in the last year, and they were apologizing, saying, I thought you were insane, but I see you were right. I wish I could have seen it back then. I was very unkind to you. And I was like, no, we all find it when we're ready. Change takes a long time. Denial takes a long time. And I said, I knew one day you would see it, but when you were ready, and I didn't need you to be ready last year. It's not about me, but I knew someday you would find it, and I would get a text message like this, or a phone call, or I'd run into you in person. And all that matters is that you have found the work, and now you see it. And now this person's life has changed immensely because they turned into their toxicity. They realized, he's right. I'm the problem. I'm always the problem. And see how empowering that is? If I'm always the problem, who's the solution? Me. See, that's the problem with relationships. We keep looking outside of ourselves for somebody to give us power and validate us. It never works. It leaves us powerless. We're always at their mercy. When you flip everything around and realize you've attracted this person into your life, or you are attracted to this person because of your toxicity and theirs, now you have real power because you're in truth. And from that place, you can forge true love and a true relationship. All right, everybody. Remember, as I always say, whenever we judge, blame, and criticize, All we're ever seeing is a part of ourselves we haven't forgiven ourselves for, and we haven't done the recovery work. As you saw, I had my own little episode tonight. Now, the flip side of that is true. Whenever we see greatness in somebody, the only reason we can see it is because we have that greatness in ourselves. Now, if you don't feel that deep in your soul, if you don't believe that, if you don't think or feel you're walking in your greatness, then the greatness movement is for you. Whether you want to join the greatness movement community group, whether it's work with me individually, whether it's just watch these podcasts every week or buy my book, we're here to help you to claim that greatness, because we all deserve that. All right, everybody, have a great night. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving as well. We'll see you next week.
I can do anything. I can reach any goal.